Welcome to the Deschutes County Board of Commissioners meeting. This is 9:30 a.m. Monday, November 13th. First item is citizen input. Is there anybody in the room or online here for citizen input? I don't see anybody. Okay. So a couple agenda items today. Item number 1, camping feasibility study. Thank you. Mark. I see you here also.
Yes. Have a few people from the team on time.
And I see Nick Lee, the Akron County Administrator, on remotely this morning. So good morning, Nick.
Mark, I don't see you on the panelist list. Are you joined?
Oh, I did.
For a presentation.
You just might want to join again.
While he's doing that, I'd give us
Okay.
kick us off.
Let's get.
Good morning, Jen Patterson, Strategic Initiatives Manager for the record. Today we are here to talk about the camping feasibility study. We have Echo Northwest joining us in person and online. Back on May 1st, 2023, the county contracted with Echo Northwest to conduct a camping feasibility study and with the final report to be delivered to the county by November 15th. So here we are on November 13th with the final report, which is right on time. The study was focused on the feasibility for recreational development for private or public RV parks and campgrounds, along with support amenities and infrastructure in 3 areas of Deschutes County. The 3 areas included in the study were Thompson Road, Drafter Road, which is in LaPine, and Crooked River Branch. The scope of work included 4 main topics, which were conducting preliminary site analysis, engineering and environmental assessment, developing conceptual RV park and campground operational and finance plans, planning the organizational structure, and submitting a final report and executive summary. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Echo Northwest to present that final report and executive summary. We have Mark Buckley here in person and Alicia Milligan and Bob Parker joining us online.
Good morning.
Great, thank you. Thank you, commissioners. Appreciate this. This was a very interesting study. I think we all learned quite a bit in this process. And I will say that from the start, we had quite a bit of support from staff throughout the county, as well as consulting others in the community and the region. So I would say that this was a group effort. ESA also provided quite a bit of technical support in the process. Alicia, do you want to share your screen, or would you like me to? Go either way.
It might be easier if you share yours, just in case there's issues.
Sure. Hold on. Good. Just want to run through a little bit of the overall motivation for this, because we do have quite a bit of data to show how scarce campground, RV, and other kinds of recreation opportunities in the region are. We did start this analysis by considering demand and then looking at the supply questions and really trying to make sure that we understood the purpose. Jen already walked through the key questions we had for the feasibility study. I will note that we did not provide a full legal review of this analysis, but this is sort of an initial feasibility, and we recognize that additional analysis and steps would certainly be necessary before any final decision would be available. But we do take into account the variety of challenges the region is facing in terms of capacity for camping and RV capacity of these sorts. And given the fact that it's been decades since we've seen any new development, that scarcity is a real factor. We know that the population has been growing very rapidly here in Deschutes County, and it's expected to continue to grow quite rapidly, almost doubling over the next several decades. But given the pace that campground development has occurred, we can expect that the scarcity, both for residents and visitors, will only grow and continue. And a big part of that is the visitation growth piece. This is a chart showing how the transit room tax or transit lodging tax revenue has been growing over time, that we're seeing increased visitation to the region, increased demand for overnight capacity, even though we really aren't seeing growth in the supply on that side. So there's a lot of information suggesting that general demand is increasing, continuing to increase, and supply has been relatively stagnant.
Can I ask a quick GRT question?
At various points in the report, it discussed kind of, ownership, operations, structures for potential campgrounds at these sites. If the county, public entity is operating a campground, who are people who are staying at that campground charged TRT or
My understanding is I probably, I'm not sure if I'm assuming that it is.
Disrupt, you know, offhand?
I don't know, offhand, we'd have to check the code.
Yeah.
Too bad, it seems like it would still, but
Yeah,
I mean,
There you go.
I think we get TRT from the state park campgrounds, but, okay, so I mean, that probably means we should get it off of any campground that we would own or operate as well.
That was certainly my understanding, and when we talked to some of the land use experts, that's how they described it. You triple check that for you.
But because one of the ways to think about this is TRT has actually been sort of flattening or slightly declining in the last year or two, and this is actually a potential strategy to nudge it up a little bit.
That's true. I think you're right, and I think we do consider some of the private operation options on these sites as well, which could potentially be part of that strategy as well to ensure that. I think there's also this positive internal rate of return or positive net present value, which is also added revenue to the county that would have more discretion.
Yeah, if we didn't charge TRT, then we could just charge a slightly higher price and, get that benefit directly. Exactly.
So we have quite a bit of information about overall visitation for recreational purposes on Sheets National Forest, which provides a nice proxy to understand how growth is increasing in demand, and the number of trips that we're talking about, over 2 million visitors a year to Sheets National Forest at this point, and that's only increasing, and really this is a supply constrained scenario. Sheets National Forest recognizes this, and they have similar challenges for developing new campground or overnight capacity within the forest. So quite a bit of spillover potential.
So one of the things that you and I spoke a couple weeks ago, one of the observations is that even by having Eco Northwest and your partners, your staff, whatever, poking around on this topic, everybody knows we're doing this, right? I mean, that's one of the exciting things is, the connections back to the state, connection back to the federal government. People know that we're looking into this. Just acknowledging.
No, I think that's a great point, because this study has seen quite a bit of interest across the state, that this isn't just a local issue. I'll say, going back to work that I did supporting the state when it was first investigating the establishment of a state office of outdoor recreation, one of the key drivers for that was the scarcity of camping opportunities in the state. That's seen as a state level issue for tourism, economic development, and that underlying TRT revenue source.
And that the pro formas that have, these are, there's a lot of assumptions that need to be refined and truthed out, but just having these pro formas that show positive return, investment return for this kind of a concept is useful more broadly than just for the sites that we've looked at. But anyone who's thinking about considering using a piece of land for a campground can go to these pro formas and start to get a feel for what what all the cost factors are that need to be considered, what kind of a return they might get. I think that's a really valuable contribution to the region.
Thanks, yes, and we did create an Excel spreadsheet tool. I'm not sure, I think we wanted to make sure we understood how it would be most useful to structure it, but there will be a tool that you have that has all of the assumptions, all the analysis, and also has the field around some of the costs, some of the occupancy rate, some of the site numbers that you can play with. So I know that was something we talked about, making sure it was something that would have some utility as this evolves and maybe goes to other sites as well.
Yeah, we could even make that publicly available, that spreadsheet, so that other people can play out their concepts.
Okay, well, again, also just pointing out that we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars annually in this region for outdoor recreation spending. And so something else that we often learn doing this kind of work across the state is that one of the biggest limiting factors for visitors and visitor opportunities is that overnight stay. So when you're seeing more capacity for overnight stays, then you're seeing more capacity for longer trips and the total spending profile on those visits. The existing availability of campgrounds is certainly a limiting factor. As we mentioned, in the report, we walk through some of the opportunities. There are several obviously on the national forest, but many of these have very limited seasons. So there is a capacity, I'd say, for this site to see greater demand in some of the shoulder seasons and potentially off seasons than we might see in the natural occupancy rate data that we're using. So we're largely relying on the existing campgrounds to look at our estimation of how much occupancy you would expect during the week and by month across the year. But depending how the amenities are designed, I think the occupancy rate data that we're using is relatively conservative. I think, as you mentioned, that we're seeing occupancy rates over 60% on several of these sites. That's sort of average across the year. Certainly full capacity on weekends during the summer, but there is still a fair amount of capacity that we're recognizing as demand increases and population visitation increases. Okay, maybe Alicia, I'll turn it over to you to start to describe the 3 sites that we evaluated.
Yeah, great.
It's important to point out, though, that less than 60% of them having an occupancy less than 60%, according to your documentation. 23 are 60% and over, and then so 34 are under in the Deschutes Forest, and that's only during the summer. And I guess when they're open.
These are some of the annual occupancy rate numbers that we were using. So
right,
that's actually tied into the averaging some of the sites over a longer period. So we could get you some of the more detailed occupancy rates if you'd like to look at those, but it really does vary by the kind of site and the kind of access, though. And some of that annual closure has a strong impact on
right. And when you have 5 feet on the ground of snow that doesn't melt in the winter like we had a couple of years ago, how many people are going to want to be camping? That's our weather factor here, that you never know. Last year we just had snow and then it melted and then we had snow. It was that way most of the winter, but a couple of years ago we had the 5 feet at my house and it didn't melt.
So that's a good point. And we do use, for all of the actual pro forma analysis, we use our relatively most conservative occupancy rate data. There is sort of a recreational occupancy rate that our colleague Bob Whalen developed, which is a higher occupancy rate than what we apply in the pro formas. So it is trying to account for that actual seasonal effect on occupancy opportunities or demand. Alicia?
Yeah. Sorry, my screen is frozen. Okay, there we go.
Slide. We can hear you fine.
You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. So this is an overview of where these 3 sites are located within Deschutes County. The first one is Crooked River Ranch in the north of Redmond, and it's in close proximity to Smith Rock State Park. It's a total of 51 acres. It does have 3 lots. However, there's only 1 opportunity area. And when we are talking about opportunity areas, these would be the most ideal places for the site of the RV or tent campsites within the total property. There's 11.9 acres within this opportunity area, and based on the space, it could approximately house 119 sites. This is the least feasible, and I'll go into some of the reasons why in a minute, but number 2 is Fort Thompson Lane site, which is just north of Bend, right outside the urban growth boundary. It is the largest of the 3 sites with 7 opportunity areas totaling 98 acres within those opportunity areas. And it does have a potential capacity of 300 sites. Drafter Road is the last, and it's right within the Lapine urban growth boundary. There were a number of lots, but there were only 3 potential opportunity areas given some site design requirements for campgrounds and RVs in Lapine. So these have a total of 63 sites within the opportunity areas. Okay, you can. Thanks.
This one. Sorry.
Yeah, go for it, Bob.
Greetings, Bob Parker, Echo Northwest, senior policy analyst, and speak a little bit to the land use implications of these. And I think the main thing that we want to communicate here is that all of the sites have some challenges, I would say, with entitlements. And so the Fort Thompson site is an EFU zone, and there are specific regulations and OAR 660-033, which addresses uses on agricultural lands. Basically states that campgrounds aren't allowed within 3 miles of a urban growth boundary unless an exception is approved. There's an entire process for doing exceptions that the state requires local governments to go through. So basically, you would be looking at exception to a resource land goal. And then proximity to natural recreation amenities, another element of that particular rural campgrounds must be adjacent or contain a park or natural amenity for recreational use. So that could be a challenge for a couple of the sites. Can you go to the next slide, Mark? And then a few additional considerations here.
Sorry, Bob.
Bob, can I ask about the first item? So
Yeah.
who grants that exception? I mean, if the city of Bend and Deschutes County, the landowner, are both interested in the Fort Thompson Lane property being developed as a campground, is it a state exception that we would get from DLCD, or like where does that exception come from?
Yeah, the application would be to the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and depending on the complexity of it, it would likely be a staff level review, so it wouldn't go to the commission. But essentially that agency determines whether land use activities are consistent or compliant with statewide planning goals and administrative rules. So that's a step that I think creates some uncertainty in the process, and that uncertainty in our experience can be compounded depending on whether local land use advocates are taking issue with the particular land use actions. We don't have any information on that at this point, but it certainly creates a risk factor that would be worth a little bit more evaluation and probably some discussion with your planning staff.
Yeah, planning review at the table, he may have a thought on that. I think it's the local jurisdiction where the land is located, which is the commission.
Correct. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the board. Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director. So you would, the way this, just to complement Bob's remarks, that if the board were to go forward and try to go through the entitlement process for like the Fort Thompson property, it would come with a Goal 14 exception. And then you would demonstrate that there's a specific provisions under Goal 14 to irrevocably committed, reasons exception. There's a third that I can't think of at the moment. Physically committed is the third. And you would justify as part of the campground why the Goal 14 exception is justified. It would go to a hearings officer proceeding, and we would process it through a quasi-judicial set of procedures, and ultimately, that decision, it could find its way to the board if there were a lot of interest. Obviously, if you go on through to the Land Use Board of Appeal or to the Court of Appeals, the state doesn't. You don't see a lot of goal exceptions in the rural county, as we know, whether it's a goal 11 exception, exception to goal 3 for exclusive farm use. They're difficult, and the state structured those provisions for that desired outcome. So Bob's remarks are, again, noteworthy in that it gets complicated, and it brings a certain amount of uncertainty.
But I have a question about this statement. It says applies to Fort Thompson Lane and Drafter. Well, Drafter is within the Lapine city limits.
Yeah.
So isn't it the other property?
Drafter wouldn't. I think it's the other property. No, the Drafter Road is in the Lapine. Is in the city, the urban growth boundary of Lapine. So that would not require a goal exception. For the property near Crooked River Ranch, that would require a plan amendment. That would require, I don't want to get ahead of the presentation, but there's some zoning challenges to that site that would require some amendments. But Commissioner Dare, you're right.
I'm going like they've got the wrong one up there. It's the big river that should be there.
Yeah.
So what you mean to goal 14, that's urbanization?
Correct.
So a campground is a goal 14 exception or urbanization.
When it's within 3 miles of an
Okay.
urban growth boundary, that would be my
The starting
approach. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, it's not to say that it couldn't be done. It's just another part of the application, and it leads to a certain amount of uncertainty. And there's not, a lot of examples where counties have successfully demonstrated a goal 14 exception, because you have to demonstrate that need can't be met in the city. And maybe there's analysis that can show it in this region. But to the team's approach and to Bob's remarks, it's just acknowledging that there's some uncertainty.
Yep.
While we're on this slide, the proximity to natural recreational amenity, another question I had for Thompson is, there are a number of entities who have expressed interest in trail development on the 500-acre property. Does that qualify as a recreational amenity for the purposes of establishing a campground?
That's a good question. The administrative rule reads, campgrounds approved under this provision must be found to be established on a site or is contiguous to lands with a park or other outdoor natural amenities. So a trail could fit the definition of other natural amenity that's accessible for recreational use by occupants of the campground. So I think a trail would be consistent with that particular provision of the administrative rule.
Or designation of much of the remainder of the 500 acres as a park of some kind that complements the campground. And to go back to the question of why can't you do this inside the city? We don't have opportunities for a 500-acre park with a campground anywhere inside the city of Bend. That would be my one way to frame this opportunity. So thank you.
Bob, Commissioner Dare's question about the Drafter Road site challenges.
Yeah, the Drafter Road site is zoned RR10, which is a rural residential designation. It would not require a goal exception because it's already been granted a goal exception, at least for resource lands. If it's within 3 miles of a UGB, the Division 33 may apply, but Division 33 is specific to agricultural lands. So as Peter said, that particular site would be a zone change and potentially a plan map amendment to make it consistent with a zone designation that allows campgrounds.
So there would still be a zoning amendment necessary potentially.
Did you mean Crooked River Branch, Bob?
Yes, Crooked River, excuse me.
Okay.
Side's confused. Drafter Road is within the Lapine urban growth boundary.
Crooked River Ranch isn't within 3 miles of an urban growth boundary.
No, and it's not agricultural EFU zones either. So that particular Division 33 rule that we were mentioning does not apply. So the slides here need to be amended to not include Draft or roadside or the Crooked River site.
Sorry, just to be sure that I'm clear, Bob. Apologies if there's something incorrect on here. Is it that Draft or road shouldn't be identified on either of these? Draft road is second. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Sorry, we'll get that straightened out. I know there was some challenges with some of that final designation. Maybe it relates to this slide here. If we talk through this slide, Bob, were you able to see the?
Yeah. So a few additional state and county land use regulations. So to state the obvious, campground would need to be consistent with applicable county regulations. The Deschutes County Comprehensive Plan, consistent with the state land use system, emphasizes conserving agricultural lands and integrating development designs with natural terrain. So again, this would apply to the Fort Thompson site. And then with respect to the Draft or road site, that would be subject to the provisions of the City of La Pine Development Code. And within the current zoning, campgrounds and RV parks are conditional uses with specific standards and criteria for approvals, which may be a lower threshold or a lower level of complexity. But again, I think you would want to coordinate with your partners at the City of La Pine to better understand the specific issues and any concerns that they might have with the site and that proposed use.
One more clarification question. There in the report, there was a mention of how RV parks are not an authorized use in EFU lands. So that's something that we need to consider for Fort Thompson. And but back in the day, when we first asked staff to do a memo, a CDD staff to do a memo for us, one of the things that we parsed out was RV parks are not an authorized use in EFU, but campgrounds are an authorized use in EFU lands, conditional use, and campgrounds can have RV sites within them. So just to, if there was any kind of concern about, well, at Fort Thompson Road, you can't do an RV park, so there can't be RVs. I just want to emphasize and clarify that while you can't do an RV park at Fort Thompson, we can do a campground with some RV sites, so that there is potential for RVs at Fort Thompson.
Yeah, that is consistent with the administrative rule, which states campsites may be occupied by a tent, travel trailer, yurt, or recreational vehicle.
And then just the one other thing to say about Fort Thompson, in terms of land use regulations and considerations, there was some question about rezoning EFU zoned land for other purposes. And I just want to emphasize for anyone who's watching this recording later on, and for county staff, we see the comp plan amendment and rezone applications of EFU zoned land come to the board, come to CED staff all the time, quite often they come all the way to the board level. And we have granted a large number of comp plan amendment and rezone applications. So if that is if people perceive that as a barrier or a constraint for the Fort Thompson property, it is something that happens on a regular basis. And based on the characteristics of this site, never been farmed, not great soils, no irrigation water rights, it is consistent with a lot of the complementary rezone applications that we have seen for properties in other parts of Deschutes County. So you know, I guess I just want to say that while the report, you know, highlighted that as potential concern, it's, you know, having experienced so many complementary rezones at the county level, I don't see that as a significant concern. You know, still would have to, we would still need to pursue an application, do all the work associated with that, but just given prior experiences, I'm not as concerned about that as other things like access.
Anything else on this slide, Bob?
Nope.
Okay, Alicia?
Great. Well, now that we've talked about some of these key challenges and land use considerations, so the Crooked River Ranch site is zoned rural residential, which does not allow for campgrounds or RV parks of any kind as a permitted or conditional use because of the rural residential zoning. That set aside, if that wasn't a constraint, the opportunity area is highlighted here in the red. This is kind of a flat top of this very steep sloped site that also has wetland and Deschutes River setbacks. The access is another consideration. The road going to the end of this site at Northwest 84th Court does not meet the access requirements for campgrounds and RVs. There's about 1.5 miles of road that is not either a collector or arterial road, which are the requirements for campgrounds and RVs. The topography, like I said, is very steep in most of the areas, and there's considerable amount of rock on the top of this plateau in the opportunity area that would not be desirable to remove for RV types of access. When we did a site tour there, it would be more suitable to a recreational trailhead for the local community, or somewhat of a walk-in tent development only. But that's, again, if the constraints were not considered a challenge, but there are quite a few challenges to this site. Would you go to the next? Again, Fort Thompson Lane is the largest. I won't go over a lot of the zoning and regulatory constraints because Bob just talked about those. But one of the big challenges for this is the access is also not meeting the requirements for a campground. It has a private road that bisects the property, but it would not count as a required access road. The Swally Irrigation Canal is also bisecting in several areas, as well as the lateral canal. And this presents quite a few design challenges as you're not allowed to build over the top of the canal, as well as with utilities. So on the map, you can see the opportunity area 2 is the most desirable area because of the flat nature of the land. It's a ways from the freeway, so there is less freeway noise. And like you were saying earlier, the opportunity areas in the north part of this property could be desirable for trail development. Drafter Road, of all the sites that were potential, Drafter Road within the city of La Pine a campground has to be on a property size greater than 2 acres. And so that limits us to these 3 sites here. The one on the kind of in the middle, right next to this frontage road connection. This one has kind of a narrow landscape, and so it would present probably some more design challenges. However, these 2 down at the bottom, if there was a potential for connecting this center lot or purchasing this piece of land, this would make a nicer, large RV park that you could potentially add amenities such as the park that would be required under the goal exception. Also with this site is the potential Wickiup Junction connection, and it could have a potential impact on reducing some of these property sizes depending on the design that would entail in the future.
Oh, I have a question. That center lot you're referring to, how big is that? Is that like an acre or something?
No, it's 3, I can't read it, 3, a little over 3 acres.
No, I meant, okay, you were talking about building the bottom 2, putting them together.
Each
center
one
lot
of, each one of these squared lots is 2 acres. And I believe this lot in the middle is a little over an acre.
Okay, that's what it looks like. Thank you.
Yeah.
For staff, probably property management staff, to explore those 2, the 2 parcels that are in between our the county properties. And I mean, just find out who owns them, you know, whether we think there might be an interest in, you know, either sale or swapping. I mean, you know, you look at the way that our properties are sort of chunked up. You know, if we could trade one of those parcels in the middle, or I mean, we could trade a parcel anywhere in there to consolidate a bigger piece. Last time I drove down Grafton Road, they were all undeveloped. So I mean, I don't see why to a property owner one would make a difference compared to another necessarily. But
yeah, we're happy to do that. I see Jen taking notes, and she can follow up with Christy, and we'll get that information back to the board.
it really does seem like that would, consolidating a little bit in there would open up a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, that was what we noticed as well when we did our site visits. This site is also very accessible to quite a few amenities right off of Highway 97. I'm sure you probably know them, so I won't go over them. And then the utilities. I won't go into much detail, but for Drafter Road, the utilities were not of a large concern. Fort Thompson Lane had some water and sewer issues that would need to be further investigated, but they were all available. Were there any other questions about the sites, the physical sites themselves?
We're gonna go back into the financial piece now.
I guess one question I do have about Fort Thompson was, and maybe you could just flip back to that map for a moment. So we have Swaley's private road, and we have Swaley, both a main and a lateral canal running through this area. Mm-hmm. And I definitely appreciate that Swally does not want their canal or their road to be, impacted by either a campground or recreational use. But I do want to flag that, I think there are ways that we could address Swally Irrigation District's needs, potentially by helping, expedite canal piping through a short section or something like that. And then, not having all kinds of crossings across the buried canal, but, having some designated places where you literally could have, a buried canal plus some kind of a crossing structure or, simple bridge, something like that. And I'm just wondering if those corridors essentially that bisect the property were not so much of a constraint, how much development opportunity does that open up?
Well, I think these, like, in total, the whole site was under 600 acres. And the opportunity areas, I believe just the number 2 was listed on the slide as 98 acres, I believe. And so that would open up a few more areas. All of these, again, have different landscape terrain, but most of them are fairly flat. If you can kind of see, there's like a yellow tint. Those are the steep sloped areas. So I would just, it would be, if the Swally Canal wasn't an issue, there would be potentially greater area for expanding more sites or more amenities like trails and parks within the property.
Wasn't it the case that even with the existing opportunity sites, you could put more than 300?
Yeah, I think the space allowed for, I can't remember the exact number, it was close to 1,000.
I
I don't
actually,
think we need.
Yeah.
But
I have a project right behind that. It's private investors with 57 acres. And they have a plan to do 330 single-wide manufactured homes on those 57 acres, which is actually a better allocation for a manufactured home than some other manufactured homes I work with in the community. So anyway, that's kind of an interesting contrast.
Yeah, I think both make the point that there is plenty of capacity for site development, and the 300 we used in our analysis was mostly based on what was seen as sort of a feasible, typical size. But I think with that added access, you certainly open up more amenities, which contribute to a potential higher occupancy rate and more sort of return on the investment over time. So,
and just the connectivity of the recreational opportunities as well.
So I know we did look at the typical trail information. I realized that CODA had offered to potentially develop those trails, which certainly be an amenity that people would be attracted to, and the fact that this might experience less snow than many of the other trail areas in the region could extend its season, as well as the fact that there is enough area to develop enough trails that it would be a worthwhile trip on its own. So as we said, we were looking at the actual occupancy rate data for the county and typical hotel and RV site. And we do have a slightly lower occupancy rate in general. We see these are monthly for the, when it says non-recreational, that speaks to sites that don't have particularly high amenities with them. And we recognize that Drafter Road probably wouldn't develop amenities, whereas Crooked River and Thompson could both have the capacity to develop natural amenities, park amenities, trail amenities. That tends to be one of the main drivers we see in the actual occupancy data in the region and across the state. So we also, as we said, looked at the opportunity area, looked at the feasible sites, although for Thompson certainly could have more than 300, but for our analysis, we used 300 and looked at the typical, given some of the assumptions around the amenities and access, what we expected some of the range of rates would be. And again, in our model, we have variation in monthly occupancy rates and monthly rates in terms of the revenue that we generated. So these are the operational occupancy forecasts for the sites. This is a typical representative year after it's at full capacity. The analysis generally assumes construction around 2025 and about 4 or 5 years to get up to full occupancy. But again, with population growth, visitation, increasing demand, I think these are quite conservative estimates, probably in terms of how much occupancy we might actually experience. So those are the occupancy assumptions that go into the financial calculations. Again, we have quite a bit of detail in terms of staffing, sort of typical operation and maintenance costs, as well as the initial capital costs. Looking at the cost to open in terms of capital and basic permitting, soft costs, design, etc. 3.7 million for Drafter, about 18 million for Crooked, and 22 million for Thompson, which relates quite a bit to their size. And these all have relatively attractive internal rates of return based on the occupancy rates, typical market rates, around 10%, 10 to 11%. I also, just from sort of maybe another look at it from sort of a public investment perspective, if we're looking at it from a net present value perspective, looking at those costs up front and then discounted future revenue streams, even over just a 15-year time frame, we're looking at $3 to $15 million in terms of returns on those investments in sort of a discounted present value sense. Certainly these sites would be viable, expect to be viable much more than 15 years. In terms of funding and operations, as we said, we have, I think, good information to understand how the operations would likely play out, recognizing there is some potential variation in the cost if it were to be managed by the county versus private contractors or a partnership opportunity. There are a variety of federal and state funding opportunities, as well as potentially some of the use of some of the regional TLT, PRT funding that's become available and generally shifting towards funding some of the tourism infrastructure opportunities such as campgrounds. I think there's also quite a bit of potential on the site, such as the trail development or river access, that would contribute to the amenities on sites, and this is where we see the real variation in what the level of demand and then the market rate would likely be for any of these sites.
Mark, there was one kind of obscure funding stream that we learned about over the last couple of years, which I wanted to double check to see if it was included in your pro forma, which is that for the RV licenses that the state issues each year, they share a portion of that revenue with the county because we offer RV sites. So we get to rent out RV sites, and then the state gives us a chunk of RV license fee revenue. In addition to that, we learned this from the RV park, at the fairgrounds. But if that's not included in your pro forma, I'm wondering if it's too late to add a line for that.
Yeah, I know that we obtained and used the county campground financial data that was shared. So if it was available in those data, I'll confirm, but that is something that wouldn't be difficult to update. So I'll double check on that with Bob, my colleague who built the pro formas.
Yeah, because my impression is that for the fair and expo RV park, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars a year. So it's it's a pretty good deal to be, and the intention behind it, from a policy perspective is they want to increase capacity. So it's adding capacity, from their perspective, they're investing in adding capacity. from our perspective, we get both paid for the sites as they're being used, and, we're paid just for offering the site as well, which is a great thing.
No, that's important. I'll make sure that we capture that. I'll follow up on that. Sure, we've got that in there. We don't. So I know we've probably gone longer than we planned to for just the presentation part. This was very helpful. I want to make the point again that from a sort of a demand financial feasibility perspective, all of the sites show very positive potential. Understandably, the Crooked River Ranch and Thompson Roads, Thompson Lane sites are going to see a variety of potential permitting challenges, but we didn't want to make too many assumptions about whether those were insurmountable. So the analysis doesn't make that sort of assumption by any means. I do point out that there are public-private partnerships, both in terms of funding and operation, for all of the sites. In Drafter Road seems relatively the most readily suited for that, given proximity to existing private operations and just proximity to other local businesses, and a variety of federal, state, and local funding, which is a constant shifting landscape, but we want to make sure that we identify all the ones that are there right now. So it sounds like there might even be, I'll double check that we've got all of those in there, but we'll make sure that we've identified everything that's on the books, but federal, state, and local are all available right now. So with that, I don't know if Bob or Alicia, are there any other points you wanted to make before we wrap up the presentation? We'll make sure we get the that Drafter Road distinction sorted out. I think there was some ambiguity around proximity to urban growth boundaries, whether it was on the inside or outside that had come up, but we'll sort that out. Apologies if there are any ambiguity there. But
yeah, I do have a couple more questions, financial related. For the Lower Bridge site, the Crooked River Ranch area site, that seemed like a pretty large number for first development costs, and I'm wondering how much of that is related to the site complexity, the topography, the connectivity to better roads, things like that. And one of the reasons I ask is because the friends and neighbors of the Deschutes River Canyon have pitched this idea. Hey, we think it's a great idea to do a campground somewhere in the Lower Bridge area. We just don't think that's a good site right there. So if we explore another site, I'm wondering how sensitive that first cost is to, if we pursued the fans, concept of, an easily accessible site right off of Lower Bridge Road up on the rim, short distance, would we expect to see that first cost go down significantly, or is 17 million just the cost of building something that scale?
Yeah.
Correct. Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's fine. I was just gonna say that, yeah, Bob did calculate quite a bit of grading because that site was so steep, and also the top had quite a few boulders, and so a lot of that was construction cost.
But Bob Whalen, who put together the pro forma, did have some similar sites referred to, and it was quite a larger cost per site there based on those topographic access issues. But you're right, we would see a lower cost to develop per site at a more accessible, more Fort Thompson style site, which would improve the return and the net present value.
And will that be in the workable Excel spreadsheet we're coming? Will that be able to be fleshed out a little bit? The concept, if it's a different site, or is that strictly for that particular site we studied?
I think there are some other factors that would relate to it. You would need to think about how many sites are available, because that's one of the key inputs to the analysis. But the model would, especially in that same proximity, the demand, the occupancy rates would be relatively similar to what's in there. So it would be sort of that, the cost for this, initial development, and then both the annual operating costs and the number of sites would need to be modified, but a relatively straightforward modification if you have that information.
I do
And
have a question.
also a note too, in the model, it was modeled for an RV park because we didn't have tent site specific pro formas. And so that's another big distinction, is that it is modeled at an RV park rate.
Question is from a homeowner in the community, and they want to know if the East Cascades Audubon Society had been conferred with. And honestly, you're calling it Crooked River Ranch, but really you should be, I think Lower Bridge is a more indicative term of that area. Crooked River is like 90% of Crooked River Ranch is in Jefferson County. So anyway, we do have 10%, but yeah, was the Audubon Society, because she said it's a bird watching neighborhood.
I don't believe we spoke to anyone with the Audubon Society.
It wasn't incorporated in our scope of work to consult with outside organizations. It was really to stick with the operational and site analysis.
I believe there is some crossover between the fans and the Audubon, like in terms of membership. So the concerns we heard from the fans about, well, definitely don't think about putting a campground down at the bottom of the site in the floodplain. I think that would be the biggest area of concern in terms of birds up on the rim. It's up in the high desert, just like the rest of the rim of the Middle Deschutes Canyon, but something that we would want to explore more in depth, certainly with further development exploration.
And the letter that we did receive from fans was shared and used when we went out there for the on-site analysis as well.
I think that did speak to one of the benefits we understood that some of the neighbors might expect to recognize, that if you had more developed sites in that proximity, it would potentially reduce some of the dispersed, unmanaged camping in that area.
Okay, and then my one other first question was about Fort Thompson. I was wondering whether that 21 million price tag, did that include any of the associated park development that might go with the campground, or is that just to get a road in, develop the campground and cover that?
It would include structures and sort of the typical structures that we would need for an RV park of that size, administrative structures, bathrooms, some of the other basic facilities and amenities for that market rate RV park. It did not include development of trail costs or some of the other additional amenities, and recognize that that was a cost that could potentially be provided in kind in some way by regional partners.
But to the extent that those buildings did double duty as bathrooms for a park, like a few more parking sites for people to use the park, then say there was another partner that was interested in the park component, there might be a little bit of cost sharing that could be done on some of those first costs for the campground.
I think so, yes. Yeah, this doesn't include, something that we did discuss when we visited the sites was the potential to develop trailheads and trail amenities that are beneficial to others than those who are staying at the campground, so that neighbors, other residents of the region could use any trails that would be developed at Thompson or Lower Bridge sites. So it's true, those amenities and costs and associated revenue were not isolated in this analysis, but it is reasonable to expect that portion of its costs would do double duty for that kind of other amenity development there.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a few things that we'll follow up, make sure we get back to you and get some clarification. I appreciate the questions and, yes, complicated set of topics. Appreciate, sticking with us for this. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the work product. You know, really is a point in time kind of analysis with sideboards because it can go everywhere from here. But it's just a great starting point to really think about where are the next RV type sites possible from a county's point of view. This could be picked up by private landowners too, and just be able to see the numbers and understand the scope and scale of what's possible.
And I'm very excited about this report because it lays out the opportunities for our community and helps us as the county, as landowners, you know, as owners of land that in some cases was designated by county commission 25 years ago as desired park sites, to explore that more fully and to be able to respond to the substantial demand within our community for expansion of recreational amenities and recreational infrastructure. So thank you for doing this important piece to launch us on that pathway. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Bye.
Okay, I think we're all set. So this will come around again, you know, if there's action items that the board would, you know, call on for the board to ask for, or whatever, and you mentioned just to look at. So I don't know that we're taking anywhere else today.
I mean, I'm interested in, I think we can explore proceeding on a draft road project soon. And there are a lot of discussions I'd like to have about Fort Thompson, but I think that that's a really promising site. If there's various stars in alignment, then I think that's something that would be great to explore for our community as well.
Any thoughts about proceeding or the next steps?
Well, the costs were incredibly significant, couple million for the RV park in Drafter, which seems to be the easiest thing. And then the fact that, you know, Fort Thompson, that's where I had that project that I've been working on, and reading between the lines, seems like that's going to be a lot of work to actually do something with those almost 500 acres of campground. So I think we need to do some more digging.
So Drafter, kind of lean into Drafter at all, just as it's kind of
Well,
starting.
Drafter seems to have the most, not the most exciting place to put in an RV park, but perhaps the ask is less than 5 million. So I think that's significantly less than 21 million at this moment in time when, we want to keep our county's Moody's rating up there.
Well, yeah, so just from today, maybe looking at the Drafter a little bit, whatever that means, you know, so I don't know that, you know, what the action items are, but yeah, let's take what we have here, look at the Drafter, and yeah, look at all the sites also.
Yeah, there's a lot of offline conversations I think that are necessary before we move forward with Fort Thompson, but I think that there's something there.
And you know, that land swap as you looked at, I think that's maybe a natural that's just sitting there for us too, because you know, nobody's really asked that question, but maybe there's a way to consolidate some of those parcels also.
Yeah, I don't even know if those two kind of orphan parcels, if they happen to be owned by the same person, they might love the idea of consolidating, you know, and having two next to each other instead of two separated by a bunch of county property.
I think she did say the top parcel was not quite as easily usable as the two southern parcels.
I can start with property management, reach out and getting some of those properties for Drafter.
Well, and there may be relationships with those other private property owners already, so this may just be a go point where the conversation can start.
Great.
And I do believe that the local government grant program or the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, the state Department of Parks and Recreation, I think that runs in November. I think that runs in January. So, and I believe that with the work that's been done on this feasibility study, we have enough to pursue one of those grants, but it would be, if that's if we're really interested in drafter, and that is actually a very good source of financing for projects like these, I would hate for us to miss that cycle and be waiting a whole another year before it comes around. So, like maybe you could do a little bit of
Little bit
research
into
on
that program. Yep,
Great. Thank you very much.
thank you.
We did it. What was that?
I said I'm up next, so I'm staying.
Oh, good. I see. There we go. Okay. So moving to our next agenda item, a short-term business license program consideration. Welcome.
Thank you. So just to provide a little bit of background on this, on September 18th, the Community Development Department brought a review of short-term rental policies and programs before the board. They conducted a lot of interviews with various agencies, stakeholders, other local governments, and provided a comprehensive overview of issues related to short-term rentals and potential solutions which could be implemented. At that time, I believe the board directed staff to look into what a business license option would look like. And so I was a designated staff to do that. Well, I'll acknowledge I'm not the subject matter expert. I did meet with a lot of departments and people, all of whom I think are in the room here, to provide support for any technical or legal issues you may have, but consulted with legal, finance, who's been really heading up any sort of short-term rental collection fees at this time, community development, Todd Cleveland with wastewater management. So with that, in the extensive report that Kyle put together, drafted an outline of what a potential business license program would look like. That is in the business license briefing document that you have before you that was included in your board packet, and going with what other local governments have been doing and the history of what I learned from the different departments. Some potential business license components could look at making sure that the wastewater systems at short-term rentals in unincorporated areas of the county were up to par and could handle that sort of usage. Looking at further fire life safety standards. This is a pretty standard component of any short-term rental program throughout local governments, with having a little added fire life safety standards, including making sure there's adequate fire extinguishers, ingress, egress, making sure that there's evacuation routes posted, that sort of thing. The third component involved the 24/7 property management availability. This would allow neighbors or anyone else who had complaints, or if there was issues either with the people renting at the short-term rental or somebody affected by that short-term rental in the nearby location, would have a contact number to be able to address kind of in real terms some issues or violations or problems that are happening. Again, this protects the renter as well as the people who are renting, as well as gives a little bit of accountability for the neighbors. And then lastly, the short-term rental is in compliance with permissible use in zoning districts. From the report that we saw that CDD had implemented or had presented to the board, we do know that there are currently some short-term rentals in areas that aren't zoned for that. So just doing a little bit more accountability as a short-term rentals are licensed, that they are actually licensed and are in use or in compliance of their proper usage for what they're doing. So that's just some items to consider if you want to consider a business license proposal. The fee structure, we didn't build this out. We will, if the board wants to move forward, we could build out a more detailed fee structure. What it typically looks like is the initial upfront cost is a little bit more expensive, and then just an annual yearly renewal to ensure that they're still in compliance with whatever components of the business license is, but have it be a lower cost for that. So it's just sort of like a renewal fee at that juncture, but we can work with finance on making sure that business license fee and the fee would go towards an FTE to oversee this program in general. So that's a very quick overview of it. I can go into a little bit more detail of where the county is right now with the short-term rentals, but that's also in the briefing materials, and we have the experts in the room to also talk about that if you have questions on that.
I think one of my key questions, and this goes to all staff, is Within this business license proposal, there are checks on things, checks on whether they're fire safe, checks on whether we're having impacts to groundwater through inadequate wastewater infrastructure, checks on your compliance with authorized uses and zoning. There's those checks that I'm sure we are sort of getting at anyway, with in certain ways. And I guess one of the important questions is if we are trying to do those checks anyway, and we don't have this business license and we don't have an associated business license fee yet, then how are we absorbing those costs? Where are we paying? Where are we paying from to do that checking on, fire safeness, septic adequacy and zoning and authorized land use?
Welcome back.
Yeah, thank
Peter,
you.
you're so lucky.
And if you want to correct me and say we're actually not checking
No, it's a
those
great,
things right now, then that also would be really important.
no, it's a great question. Again, for the record, Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director. Right now, the Community Development Department in coordination with the Finance Department is screening those new applications. And if they have a single family dwelling that's in a rural residential zone, then we know that the dwelling is lawfully established. We know that the lot is also lawfully established. So we're not, with that assumption that the structure is in place and it's been permitted and reviewed with an on-site septic system, we're not doing any more analysis. Where it can come into difficulties, and I'm grateful for the team and the coordination that's happened over the last 12, 18, 24 months, is that we're anything that's an accessory structure, we're not authorizing. Anything that's differentiated from the established dwelling, we're not authorizing. And that's where we stop. Finance is not giving us a punch list of properties that don't meet those eligibility factors, and we're finding ourselves going right into code compliance. That's not the direction that we're initiating. This is someone that's exploring a TRT, so we're not being presumptuous to assume that they have an illegal, unlawful accessory structure with a poached-in septic system. That's not the direction we've received from the Board of County Commissioners, and it's a fine line that we walk in terms of what constitutes an active code compliance case and who initiates one, and our staff is not canvassing the area to try to generate these types of potential infractions. So I hope that answers your question. It really comes down to if they have an existing structure, the single family dwelling, then we know that the dwelling's been approved, that there's been a septic system that can serve it, and in which case the TRT or the TRT payment transit lodging tax is something that we can honor.
And so maybe I'll give a quick background on what our current process is. That might be helpful. And please interrupt me if I do this wrong, because this is a summary from Michelle and Judy and Robert as well. But currently there's a system, it's GovOS, I don't know if it's GovOS system that Finance uses. And what GovOS does is it pulls all of the online short-term rentals, and then Finance can go in and look to see all the online rentals, and they apply, the rental applies for an application, a certificate of authority, basically. And so that certificate of authority, I think, encompasses what Peter is saying about, the single dwelling resident, right? There's no additional checks we're doing. It's just like, does it meet these basic criteria? Then they get a certificate of authority.
So I have a question about that, because according to these numbers, okay, so if you have 3,244 total, and you're taking out the ones that are in the destination of 24 and 34, you've got 810 that are outside the destination resorts. And yet, according to this letter, it says you're working on getting 791 accounts into compliance. So are those 791 not in this number at all? And they're still sitting out here because they need to come into compliance?
No, those are included in the number. It's just that those are either new or active accounts that haven't applied for their certificate of authority yet. So the GovO system, it goes to all those Airbnb, VRBO, third-party intermediary sites. And if there's an active site, it'll basically initiate an account to be created. And then we're going out trying to get these people.
Then you're going to get their paperwork completed. So
Right,
they're already here.
Yeah.
So some of those actually then would be perhaps in the destination resorts too?
That's possible, yes.
Yeah, okay, can come from both areas. Thanks.
And until you get that completed, are we operating the assumption that they're not paying TRD yet?
That's not true, because if they're through Airbnb and VRBO, they already
Okay.
collect all that money and send it to us supposedly, but they're very tight on, they won't give us the listing of who they are paying for. So it's the ones that we try to get the homeowners to come back in and you need to fill out these, for us, because the Airbnbs, the big guys, they just send us a check. And they give us one report for everybody in the whole county. It's pretty, it's very difficult to try to get to see who exactly they have. Even when we audited them, it was like, no, you tell us what property you want to audit. So they're difficult to deal with. But we are assuming that we're collecting the money because they are using Airbnb and VRBO, who just don't have the reports to back up to see exactly where is this property. And so, Michelle just got hired on May. And yeah, May or June. So we're trying to push it, and she's doing mostly all just tax compliance. And so that's been helped, because before it was just me and a few people trying to do it, and there just wasn't enough staff to do it. So, because it's a really good change when we got that GovOS system where they're scraping all of these accounts. We did not know we got that many. I think we started out as less than 1,000 that we thought we had. So, well, the property managers were another part of that. So now they do report by individual location, the property manager. So before there used to just be one check for each property manager. Now they are reporting by their location. So that's helpful too. So we know where those properties are from. So it's been a big change. We're trying to get up to speed quickly.
We have a sense of, so mentioned property managers, which is not necessarily the same as the kind of property management 24/7 kind of complaint fielding that is being suggested under this license. Is would you say that, or can you comment at all on whether the properties that have a manager for their short-term rental, are those primarily clustered inside the destination resorts versus?
Primarily, I would say. So yes, yeah.
And that just kind of makes sense. Yeah. You're in a destination resort, you have kind of built-in property management, but the folks who don't necessarily have property managers, I would expect those to be mostly outside in the other parts of the unincorporated county. And that points out the need for, in my mind, it points out the need for that function. Having some significant short-term rental challenges on my block. The 24/7 property managers are so important to the neighbors, on noise or other kinds of noise, sanitation, other kinds of issues for protecting the other homeowners in the area from impacts, sometimes illegal impacts to their quality of life. So I want to reemphasize that, kind of to go there. That's another thing I'll ask is, we do not have a mechanism to ensure that there's a 24/7 property manager for all short-term rentals in the unincorporated county without this business license.
There's currently not one, correct?
One other thing I wanted to ask about with that, the fire piece is, I've heard from a number of people who live near short-term rentals in the unincorporated county that they are concerned about, fire risk from the campfire. Whether it's just a fire pit or whether it's, fancy gas pipe, fire rings, for the short-term rental in their neighborhood. So I'm wondering if, in addition to these basic safety checks that we have proposed here, whether there could be like an outdoor component to that.
Highway standard.
Yeah. I mean, look, yeah, I was thinking just about, fire rings or fire pits if there's one associated with the short-term rental, but yeah, I mean, we could even go a step further and say, if people vacationing is a risk of fire ignition that might spread to other neighbors, it's great to have really good defensible space around that short-term rental so that the chance that fire would move from the vacation rental property to other properties is lower. Yeah.
I think any of these standards can be built out, added, deleted. The fire life safety one in particular, I just took off of a national website that had standards set for short-term rentals in particular, so I just basically copied it from there, but I think it can be built out to any capacity like this.
Those would be two items I would suggest that we weave into there. If we choose to proceed with the business license.
Commissioner Darren, thoughts?
Oh, gosh. Well, it sounded like we had a pretty big increase this year. What did you say? 246? People are trying to find a way to survive the horrible inflation that we're dealing with right now, honestly. And I'm like thinking, oh my gosh, here we are. We're going to add another tax to people, and they're just trying to survive in today's world. I would think that the destination resorts probably, I know this is my feeling, is that they probably ensure that their units are up to code standards and that they've got their smoke detectors and they have their, they're doing what we would be taking on for the outside the area if we were going to consider this. But that's just my gut feeling is, Eagle Crest would be managing it. Pronghorn would be managing it. Tetherow would be managing it. Do we need to take on that? Probably, I would think not, but maybe the other spots would do. I know I've seen the emails where people have, had wild parties. You could add a number for them to call besides the Deschutes County Sheriff for them to take care of that wild party that happens at a lot of these rentals. So they aren't quite as aware of our fire dangers and, respect for the community the houses that surround them. So, gosh, that's it's only 8% increase, but that still seems significant for people, just trying to find a way.
So if we lean into wanting to put something into place, I would like to definitely have the roundtable, because there'll be people that'll be coming up right away saying, hey, I want this or I don't. It's because I've heard from the affected neighbor, but there's quite an industry that's growing around this. Seeing the number grow by 246 in the last year and a half or so. And I do think it's kind of a point in time. I don't know that it's going to keep going up. Hopefully it's flattening off, or I don't know what, because these are homes that could be for people to live in. So there's all kinds of dynamics around here. But it sounds like there's support for taking this another step at least, and bringing, as I said, I'm envisioning a roundtable, because I want to hear from destination resorts. Maybe they want this. Maybe there's a value for resorts. But I also come to that same conclusion. We already have a management level at the existing destination resorts too.
And their wastewater systems. I mean, definitely, I would see treating the two differently. Inside resorts differently from outside the resorts. I would argue that, we should still have a license for all of them, which just, we could have like a 2-tiered fee structure. Right? If you're inside a destination resort, the fee would be significantly lower than for outside.
Well, so it is,
And, you know, if the majority of the board wants there to be no fee inside the destination resort, that's. I could get there possibly, but, it would be great to have something like a hearing, and have, you know, let people give public input and to send notification. You know, we have the address data for the 3,000 something, properties. It'd be great to send, you know, notification both to those property owners and their neighbors. And let everyone who's, involved in this, who, you know, has a real interest and stake in this, you know, have a chance to provide input.
yeah, and that's my thought too.
Do we have any idea what other counties charge for, short-term rental fee?
I can look into it.
I mean, I'm
don't have
just
it yet.
curious, so we have 810, we charge $100, you know, does that really pay for an employee? Probably not.
So, I mean, we batted this around a little bit, and the reason why we didn't include it is, you know, Robert, I'm not feeling this stuff in here, but, you know, just doing a little bit more in-depth analysis of actually what kind of program we wanted to look at and what the fees would actually cost from that, and then kind of building it out from there, but have the fee structure really be to support the licensing program for that FTE versus just having an arbitrary fee to charge people. But I think we're definitely looking well under $500 for the initial fee, and then a much smaller renewal fee. But again, without knowing kind of what program and kind of what are we looking at 3,000 properties? Are we looking at 300 properties? And, you know, how in depth are we looking at that is.
I think hearing from the public is really coming down.
As I say, I mean, yeah, we could get all kinds of interesting input here, so I don't know exactly where it's going to go. Yes, Robert.
Hi, Robert, what's your officer? I just wanted to correct information. I just wanted to add a little bit more information. To Commissioner Shane's earlier question, currently the TRT funds the FTE to provide the certificate of authority. However, none of the costs of CBD where they have to look into information is covered. They absorb those costs. So that's kind of the unknown as well for implementing a business license fee. It's that we can easily come up with the cost of an FTE to administer the program, but the unknowns are within the CBD when you have to go and look at the fire and life safety, look at the other issues, and how much staff time is involved there. So I don't know, Peter, if you want to address those issues, but that makes it a little more complicated in determining the expenses and then the fee to recoup those costs.
Yeah, and I appreciate the context. I didn't know if this was warranted, but I think it is now with that kind of segue. You know, when you're looking at a business license program, you know, ultimately you have to examine the single family dwelling. We have had experiences where property owners have put in another bedroom, you know, they've taken out the closet and they call it a bedroom. And technically that's not a bedroom because it doesn't have egress. And so it gets to be a slippery slope in terms of verifying how many people are in the dwelling. Is that somehow out of alignment with what the septic system was approved for? And so the moment you start looking at the floor plans in relationship with the application, the evaluation of the septic system, that takes time. And to what extent other elements are listed into the business license that may or may not trigger land use, that can take time. And there's going to be a cost associated with it if you want cost recovery. We want cost recovery, and this is the expectation that you have of CDD. It's important to acknowledge that the business licensing programs that the counties have throughout Oregon, I know I mentioned this in the past, but there are several counties that have found their programs appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals, even though they tried with the best legal assistance to try to wall it off, that this is a business licensing program. It doesn't trigger land use. It's just for the punch list that Jen is, you know, kind of offered as an example. Tillamook County and Clackamas County are currently still under litigation in terms of the way that they've structured their programs. Other counties have found themselves appealed and it has not, their programs have been sustained. But the message that I'm communicating, I think, is if you look at our land use history and the level of participation and interest, one should approach this with their eyes wide open, that if we establish a business licensing program, even with the best of intentions, to try to wall it off from land use, it could be it could be challenged to the courts, and if it does, it could be a multi-year process. And I'm just looking at Clackamas County, and again, Tillamook County's business licensing program is just a beautiful movement. So again, not to deter you in any way, it's just know that it could be a multi-year effort for the county to clarify and execute a program that meets the board's expectation.
So a couple thoughts along those lines. The intention is to reduce the risk and impacts to the neighbors. I think that's the starting point for me. I remember the city of Lapine Incorporation, where my wife and I run a business there. Business license was discussed, and I said, go ahead and charge us $50, but what are we getting for that? Maybe hire the street sweeper to come through twice a year instead of once a year after do something that makes it positive for everybody. So then, that's the thing. If we have rural property owners that are utilizing this opportunity, it's a free market opportunity. How are we keeping it positive? So, that would be the thing. And I don't know that we would, let's not get near streets on this, but what can we do to, market the fact that Central Oregon, we've got our act together, or, Deschutes County proper, and we celebrate this a business opportunity, and we're keeping it positive. So, hopefully we can keep it on that positive side.
And then, of course, we're always desperate for more housing. And then when people put things into short-term rentals, then it's coming out of the long-term housing for people that need to work, that want to work here.
Well, and the reality is, this may be a litigious thing, but that's the I want to hear from the folks that are impacted by this. What are the push and pull on this?
Yeah, I think it is really important to, protect our groundwater, protect the neighbors, from fire, noise, and other kinds of concerns. To just pick up on Commissioner Deere's mention of long-term housing stock in the region, that's certainly a concern I have with short-term rentals, and I don't think we're even touching that with this business license discussion, but I think this is a reasonable place to start with policy making, just to make sure that we are not having people can have these great short-term rental opportunities without having a lot of negative impacts on our community. So I would like to see us proceed. Like I said, I think that it would be appropriate to have a license and fee for all short-term rentals, and we could make it a two-tier system to just account for the fact that within destination resorts, there's a lot of the concerns are non-issues.
I want to bring up one other thing that's a possibility. I know with the GovOS software, there is something in there that complaint, like you could do a complaint. We haven't done it because it probably costs more money to do it.
Of course it does.
Another module.
But there is something in there, and when they find these things, that somebody could do a complaint thing. I don't know who would respond to that, if that's a code enforcement, or I guess, I don't know who, we could look into that.
And really importantly, when they would respond to it. You have some guests who are behaving badly. By the time code compliance hears about it, the weekend's over and they're gone. And that in my mind is where most of the value of these 24/7 property defenders are. And again, in my experience on my block, having that person who you can call and say, it's 10:30 and they're, people are screaming out the window and blaring their music. The property manager gets on it right away, while, anyone who's responding from a county, besides potentially a sheriff's deputy, and that's, it's kind of a waste to send a sworn law enforcement officer to, tell people to just turn down the music. we will not find an efficient and responsive system like this 24/7 property manager anywhere within the county structure.
Yeah, I think just for clarification, when I think when you say destination resorts, we have 4 destination resorts. We have Sun River, we have Blackfeet, we have Innocent Mountain as resort communities, or Sun River's an urban unincorporated community. As you're well aware, Sun River's on record as acknowledging that with their robust HOA system and accounting system, that they more or less are kind of policing themselves, kind of under the HOA model, Commissioner Chang, that you're talking about. So you have, we'll just lump it up, the resorts that, and Kyle Collins, our associate planner, as the board knows, coordinates with it for destination resorts on their overnight lodging unit annual reporting. So you do have two entities. You have kind of those areas that act like resorts and are resorts, and you have those short-term rentals that operate in the rural county and like in rural residential zones, places like Tumalo or Terrebonne, right? So that gets to your kind of, to the extent that the board is going to have a public meeting and talking about that. You've got those 2 camps. Maybe there's a third, but I can't think of one.
And if, I mean, looking at this list of potential things that a business license does for us, if we can suss out whether, within those resort communities, there is 24/7 property manager availability for every single, short-term rental within a destination resort, then, I might be willing to just drop that. Drop the destination resort properties out, because everything else is covered. I know it's covered within those resort communities.
Yeah, I also thought that most of these things on this list was already happening at these resorts. However, I didn't want to reach out without having a determination to move forward. I'm happy if the board directs to reach out to these resorts just to kind of get a general sense of what they're doing, but I didn't want to jump there.
So is that all right for Jen to reach out just to assess this property management function?
Well, if I haven't at our board meeting today, we've already started the process, and this was requested by the board. Education to the community is part of this also. So I'm not sure what the solution or what the action is going to be out of starting this process. But yeah, let's ask, what's going on here, because I know there'll be a few property owners saying, "Oh, you need to do this now because that house right there is the problem." I understand that. We've gotten that call a few times, but we're looking at the big picture right now, see what may be the right thing for Deschutes County, but it's good to understand the numbers. If we're still seeing growth, that's interesting. Because I think of COVID and people, let's lock down. Oh no, let's go rent a house for the month. And then, there's opportunity. So, what is it going to look like a year or two from now?
Well, I mean, as we saw from Mark and Eco Northwest's data, something like 3% growth in lodging demand year after year for decades. I think that there's got to be a point where we're saturated, but I would have thought that we would have reached it, a little while ago, and we don't seem to have yet. So as long as there are business opportunities to be had, I think people will continue to explore short-term rental properties.
Good. So you support proceeding in some fashion, and say we're not making decisions today,
Right.
We're opening it up.
Yes, I would like to hear from our community.
Great, so I'll work with
It's a
Tarzan
project.
about what that next public outreach step will be, but we'll continue to move forward then.
Another big project for you, Jeff.
Well,
Oh,
it's not feasibility to start, so it's good.
Yeah,
timing.
there you go.
Oh, we're just getting started.
Oh, that's right, I have to do it. Okay, I think I'm done, thank you very
Thank
much.
you so much.
All right,
Thank you, everyone, for being here today.
Good luck with those 791.
Thanks to TDD for doing the initial work on. Yeah.
Next item is a consideration of letter of support for removal of AJ Tuckerville.
Thank you, Commissioner. For the record, Whitney Hales, Deputy County Administrator.
Oh, yeah, I think Lee was
He
locked out, wasn't it? You were locked out for a moment, weren't you? Go ahead and sit down. We're just starting.
Yeah, I think just, and joining me is Lee Randall, Facilities Director. I'll let him get settled. We spoke to the board last week under other items, about the fact that the Bend Landmarks Commission will be considering the county's application, related to the AJ Tucker building next Tuesday on the 21st. And, staff has prepared a draft letter of support for the board's consideration. This draft, which I brought additional copies if that would be helpful for the board. Does anyone should? Commissioner?
Yes.
This draft essentially outlines the process the county has worked through with respect to the AJ Tucker building and the fact that due to construction for the courthouse expansion project, this building will need to move. And so staff's happy to incorporate feedback from the board with respect to this draft. We were able to have our consultant review it. So the minor tweaks that you see in the version that I just put in your boxes today and handed out reflect our consultant's feedback. Anything to add?
Not this time.
So when I read, I'd rather just maybe the paragraphs be a little different as I read through it. Maybe over the last several months, we've explored options, maybe start off with that.
Okay.
And then instead of starting off with, we strongly encourage you to approve this. I mean, it's just a little bit too much up front because that's obviously what we're asking. That was my thought. And then it might read a little different, so some slight editing, but that would be my only.
It does sound nicer that way, softer, just a touch.
Nice. We will
Yeah.
need, yes.
That's what
What we
today's
started
motto
to do.
is.
But we can lead off with, we've been working on this for several months and it's been, we followed a process already, offered it for, whoever wants it, all kinds of stuff.
Great.
I support that reshuffling.
Okay, staff will work quickly to reshuffle. I believe that these letters are due today by end of day, to the city. So we'll make this change quickly and then get a version out for your, review and each your approval, your signature, but.
Yep, I won't leave the building until I sign it.
Wonderful.
Great, thank you.
But Lee, can you just I know that we just got a report on this last week, but can you just remind me again, like what the scope of what the Landmarks Commission is considering doing about our application is?
So my understanding is typically there's 3 or 4 options, if that's what the question is regarding. One is they could just approve it as submitted. The second would be to approve it with some considerations, some added requirements related to the type of permitting or requirements for a building permits and things related to that. It's hard to speculate about what other requirements they might want to add to our application. The third one would be to just delay the application and ask for more time to review it. If there's information that's submitted between now and next week, in addition to the packet that they'll be receiving that's put together tomorrow. And then the last would be to deny it and ask us to come back with a different option. But as I understand it, it appears there's basically 4 routes they might typically go.
And we don't have any sense that they're leaning on those 4 potential routes yet.
Not necessarily. I think, as we crafted our application, we wanted to make sure, as the letter speaks to it, that, we were demonstrating the board's interest in acknowledging the historic facade and some of the historic elements, while balancing that with the cost. And so, I'm hopeful that, staff, with the board's direction, that we provided a reasonable and feasible path forward for the commission to approve.
And they've heard about this topic over the years now, right? I mean, this is probably the 3rd or 4th time it's maybe been on their agenda, or at least 2 or 3.
Yeah, and I think in the past it may have come up as part of the Historical Society's conversation about what we might options for moving the building, et cetera, when we were in talks with the Historical Society. So I think the individual commissioners have probably been aware of the topic for quite a while and have had a chance to kind of think about what they would see as a good path forward. And I would like to share with the board good news I received just as I was coming in that our, planning application, with the city of Bend for the courthouse expansion was deemed complete as of this morning. And so, we, will be able to begin our submitting all of the application materials for the building permit. And so those are actually complete, and we've just been waiting for this step.
So the avalanche of activities begun.
Exactly, there's the next couple of weeks will be pretty busy with our architectural consultants submitting those building plans.
Thank you very much.
And don't forget Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Yes.
Do we need to do a motion to approve the letter? So I move approval of this letter to the, to Ben's Landmarks Commission with modifications as discussed.
I'll second it. Maybe could we put their first name in this letter too? I mean, it's because it's, you know, if we're gonna make it softer.
There we go. Any other discussion? I see that. Commissioner Chang? Yes. Commissioner Dare?
Yes.
The chair votes yes. Okay, so other items, compare notes before we go off to Association of Oregon Counties Annual Conference. You know, Commissioner Dare.
No, I have a membership tomorrow night. And I have to take a class somewhere. Like, of course they
A
couldn't-
field trip.
I'm like, couldn't we just have a restaurant right by the graduate? No, we're going somewhere.
Okay. Anything else? No. So, I had a request for, it's explained to me about the concept of citizens assemblies. I don't know if you've heard this or if it's come around. So it's a gentleman that's, gonna talk to us about the idea of taking a group of people, kind of like, jury duty, a diverse group of people in the community on a topic and see if you can really get down to facts and figures on this. So I just want my fellow commissioners to know that you might hear about that. You might, have you heard about that effort? It's a citizen.
Yeah, I've heard about it.
Assemblies. Yeah, so it was mentioned that there's somebody's trying to reach out. And on the topic of homeless though, is the interesting thing.
That was what I was gonna ask,
Yeah.
is what are they specifically asking homeless guys?
Yeah. So it's just education at this point in time. So I just want you to know. So Commissioner Dare, probably someone's gonna reach out to you. And so you just heard the word citizen assemblies.
What I'd emphasize is that when processes like this, you know, like really it's a community engagement or civic engagement effort. When processes like this are structured right and are facilitated well, they can be really great. And if they're not, then they can be not so good.
Well, and it was explained that it's really upfront, you know, if the local jurisdictions who need to take action, have the authority to take action, are you bodying up front for whatever comes out the other side too? So that's the interesting thing. As I say, homeless is just this huge, you know, kind of octopus right now. So we'll see. It's just a topic that was shared with me recently.
There's certainly a lot of uncivil, sometimes uninformed, public sentiment in our community around this topic right now, and so that's why I'll reemphasize again: if this is, you know, if this is organized well and facilitated well, could be great, and if not, all that angst in our community, kind of coming out in a not well managed process could be. But I'm open to the idea. I just want to make sure that we would do it right.
Right. Is that all today?
I think that's it. So meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
I think it was with the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, well,
Yes.
yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
You know,